What if your tired brain isn't just about sleep, but your gut, your hormones, and your daily habits?
Today we'll talk about the hidden systems of the body that can dramatically affect our decision capacities and cognitive clarity. Welcome to Decisions That Count. I'm neuroscientist Dr. Shawn Watson.
And our guest, Jessica O'Dwyer, is a functional health expert trusted by top execs. She's here to unpack the surprising truth behind cognitive overload.
We're going to unpack how the gut, microbiome, and our lifestyle choices can have dramatic impact on our decision capacity and resilience. This is about science-backed strategies to focus on our physical well-being as a direct route to make sure that our brain is working as it should and we're making the most impactful decisions we can.
Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we're in London.
We're in London.
So if everybody is seeing a change of set, we're here. I've just got off the plane a few hours ago, but really excited. And you're our first guest.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm really excited to talk to you today because your work focuses on that intersection of health, but also high performance. I'm one of these people, I want it all. Like I want to be in like the best physical health, but I want to be performing at my best. So from your perspective, how can I reduce like my cognitive overload? Because sometimes I just feel like I'm failing at everything.
Well, first of all, let's kind of separate women from men there. Okay, so if we're talking, you have 2 children at home, you have a high functioning job, and that's so common I hear across women is I just feel like I'm constantly catching my tail. I'm not fulfilling my to-do list. That can impact your confidence. It can impact, I suppose for women, we are so sensitive in a way to our environment because we've got many rhythms. Okay, so we've got our circadian rhythm, we've got our menstrual cycle, and when we're, let's say, out of sync with either of these rhythms, let's say our circadian rhythm first of all, when we have so many micro decisions and that cognitive overload, we can get an imbalance of what's called our stress hormone, cortisol. So when stress, that hormone increases, it impacts our menstrual cycle as well. And we can't underestimate the impact that these 2 really important hormones, estrogen and progesterone, have on our brain as well. So let's say we're taking that cognitive overload and we're noticing that real decision fatigue. We've got to kind of take a step back and just look at, okay, how is my sleep? How is my menstrual cycle? Am I noticing some symptoms around these areas? How can I support these hormones better? Because what happens then is when you take a step back and you just reflect and listen to your body and what it's trying to tell you, you can start to recognize, actually, I'm doing better in that area. Or I just need to just look at, can I get that extra hour of sleep? Because that has such a profound impact on the downstream of the functioning of these hormones and how we can, I suppose, show up on a day-to-day. And then once you start to get the energy back, you then think, oh, actually, I just did that task without even having to think too much about it. But when you're starting to notice the micro decisions are feeling overwhelming, or you're feeling irritable, quite snappy, or if someone, say your child or your husband comes to you with what might seem like a small task to them, but can just feel like a lot on you, I think just taking a step back and just reflecting and thinking, what's my top priority? Yeah. And what do I need to put first today? Because busy people can just have lots of to-do lists. You know, you often hear the saying, if you want anything done, ask a busy person. But what happens is there's constantly all these to-do lists that will always pile up because you can get caught into that rhythm.
Yeah. You know, the question that breaks me like every single day is like when I get home from work and it's been a day, Mom, what are we having for dinner?
Oh, the dinner question. Yes.
It's just like, I don't know. And it's like, I've got to that point now after like working with Shawn for such a long time on decision fatigue, to making sure that I've kind of got my meal prep and everything's pre-planned and there's food in, it's already ordered. Like, it doesn't always work out like that. Like, let's be realistic. It's best laid plans. But there's just some days where there's nothing in the house. There's nothing in here left. And it's that question and that decision that needs to be made.
It's so loaded too, I think, because it's such an emotional decision. Because like nutrition for your kids, I know for my wife, it's actually something she really thinks about and stresses about, right? So it's not just a simple decision of what's, maybe as a dad, I can make a more simple decision. But I notice in my own wife, that's actually a big question, what to eat, because there's a lot behind it about, what you're giving your kids, nutrition, development, all those things. So,
yeah. And then when you pass that decision off to somebody else, I'm still raging. Sunday night before I'm about to fly to London. So yesterday, just before I'm about to fly to London, I was like, to my husband, can you just sort the kids' dinner out? I come into the living room and they're both eating prata for dinner, which is just like fluffy fried bread. And that's it. Like no fruit, no vegetables, no protein. I'm just like, I just can't even. They're happy. Like my husband's done what I've asked him to do.
But I think we can put so much pressure on ourselves as well.
Yeah.
And what I often say to my clients is, if you can adapt to the 80-20 rule, 80% of the time you're making good decisions nutritiously for yourself and your family. But there's that 20% that, you're allowed to just have that treat meal, have that dessert. But when your brain is you've got that cognitive overload, thinking of dinner, your brain naturally goes straight to comfort zone. Yeah. So your husband probably went straight to, okay, let's have comfort food. He was probably struggling trying to make the decision as well. And it's why often people choose the not so nutritious meals when they've got that cognitive overload. Yeah. Because just thinking of food, it's like, okay, let me go with the convenience. And nowadays we've got Deliveroo, we've got so much convenient food that is high in sugar and processed food, which unfortunately gets you caught in this vicious cycle that causes physiological stress on the body. What I say to my clients is, your bucket is so full that the physiological, the psychological, the emotional stress that is happening, you're struggling to make decisions outside of that full bucket. So the doom scrolling happens, the sugary processed foods creep in more, and the binge watching shows in the evening, not that interaction with your family, because you just need to completely zone out. Your body and your brain has just gone into survival. It's gone into that comfort zone. So that's coming back to your first question you asked. If you're noticing those types of signals, just take a step back, reflect, give yourself some compassion and empathy, because that's your body telling you, I'm struggling. The cognitive overload is too much right now. So listen to these signals. So it might not just be your body presenting with a symptom. The doom scrolling, the binge watching shows, the eating processed foods, that's a symptom as well of cognitive overload.
I'd actually love to give you kind of like a real world example of something that happened to me last week. And maybe you just help me understand maybe what happened. And this might come from both of you as well, like what happened and what I could have done differently. So last week, my husband was in New York. It's school summer holidays. The kids were in summer camps, but there's obviously kind of an added layer. It's not quite as easy as school. The days are shorter. There's different pickups and getting them ready. We were preparing to come to London, so we had a big week. I had a couple of days where I really got into the flow state and I managed to get a lot done and get really, really, really productive. Was feeling quite high off the back of that, because I was like, oh God, I'm really like smashing through all of my work. I'm also training for Sydney Marathon, which is in 4 weeks. So there are a couple of like really, really long runs in the morning in 32, 33, 34 degree heat, 100% humidity. So, I'm working hard on kind of hydrating. We'd had a couple of podcast recordings, a lot going on with the business. It was just a really, really, really busy week. And then Thursday, I had a domino effect of like something went wrong in the morning with childcare, and it just had a domino effect on the whole day. And the week that I was riding so high on everything and feeling really good started to kind of all crumble, cracks started to appear. Friday, we were about to shoot a podcast recording, and I just got the mother of all migraines and lost my sight, couldn't see, had to go to bed for an hour, just had to completely down tools. Obviously, I'd pushed myself too far. And I got to that point where my body was going, nope, switch off. And it was forced me into switching off. Just tell me a little bit about, okay, I know it sounds really obvious probably what happened, but I'd love to hear from you maybe kind of what had happened. There was definitely cognitive overload in there as well as physical. And how did I allow myself to get to that point without noticing that maybe I should have stopped a bit earlier? And what could I have done differently?
First of all, I said it in my head when you were talking. I was like, please tell me she's not training for a marathon. And you literally said it just after I had the thought. So often my high performers are training for some marathon, Ironman, some really extreme endurance exercise. Now, that's not to say it's the wrong thing to do. It just means you need to be extra aware, especially as a woman, of the impact that this endurance training has on your physical body while your brain is, you know, so cognitively stimulated every day. Yeah. So I suppose I'll come at it from the physiological response and looking at our cortisol, cortisone, DHEA and mitochondrial health. Now, mitochondria are basically in our cells. I call them these little beans that help us produce energy. They're a little kind of beanish kind of shape. And they help survey our body as well. Okay, so when we consume certain foods, it will be digested via the digestive system, go to the cells, and then we will convert it into ATP. That's a very kind of simple way of explaining the mitochondria. But let's first come back to, I think, give yourself a little bit more compassion for last week. It's not a failure on you, okay? And often high performers can self-blame when something happens. It's not that you could have predicted this happen and disrupt your week. You sound like you got into a flow state, adrenaline, everything was keeping you quite alert, focused, you were feeling good. And then this disruption was almost like chaos then that just came into that flow. Now, that can dysregulate our, coming back to our circadian rhythm, cortisol often gets a bad rep, but it's really important. Gets us out of bed in the morning, helpful for mental clarity. It's when you're, let's say, pushing on the accelerator of your car. So that's like output of cortisol. But then let's say your body is saying, okay, we need to slow down. So it's kind of putting the handbrake up on the car. But what happens is you have to keep going. You have to keep pushing through because you're now adapting to having no childcare. So what happens is your body is kind of saying, right, we need to kind of slow down here, but you still need to press on that accelerator. The handbrake is coming up. And what happens is the engine can conk. Now, I'm just going to step into, what happens into the brain just a little bit. We know cortisol impacts the prefrontal cortex, which is our executive functioning. So that kind of high output of the cortisol can also impact our hippocampus, which is memory, recall. So when that cortisol output is happening so much, but the handbrake is trying to come on, it really impacts our cognitive function ability. The prefrontal cortex, like the CEO part of the brain, that executive functioning. What happens is you can really struggle then with the brain fog, get quite snappy, really can impact us emotionally as well. But all of a sudden your brain is going on this spiral thought of self-blame. This is my fault. How couldn't I foresee this? I had such a good week. I was in a good flow. So really what I say to my clients, when something like that happens, it's okay to just take a step back. Just again, take that moment of breath, breathing, just grounding yourself because it can just feel so chaotic in that sense. And just doing the best you can to still put your oxygen mask on before you put your child's oxygen mask on, because you're going straight to your children. You're thinking of your children. You're thinking of London next week. And it's normal for the brain to go that direction. But it's okay to just take a step back, self-compassion and take a break and just accept that that's the way that day went. But it's hard when your thoughts are going the opposite direction.
I love how you just spoke about your executive functioning being the CEO of the brain, because that was what, when I started to work with Shawn, that's what you were teaching me as well.
And I think Jessica raises a really important point in that this is physiological. I think it's very easy to blame ourselves and think it's like a failing of willpower or it's our fault. But everything she just described is biology, right? There's nothing that we can necessarily do about it. There is a physical limitation to our brain. We know about it for our muscles and other organs, but we tend not to think of our brain as having a limit, which is absolutely true. And I think that's a big thing for certainly high performers, is they do think it's their own failing, whereas they just have to recognize that it's physiological, it's biology.
Yeah,
exactly. Because high performance, you're so used to output, you're so used to performance, you're so used to high achieving, resilience, because that's what got you to where you are now. And then when situations like that happen, it can just feel like that, just self-blame, when really it's physiological. We've got to listen when our body's whispering, because trust me, when it shouts, it's harder to come back. So kind of on the marathon thing, it's maybe just looking at your training routine, and rest is so much more productive in some situations than actually pushing yourself to do a 10K training session. When your body is saying, I'm really struggling to do this session, just listen, because it might actually need more recovery and rest. And that puts you in a much, much better place for that marathon. I see it so much with my high performers. They're like, rest, but that's not what my coach is telling me. I said, but you're just after running 10K 4 times this week. Yeah. You've got back-to-back board meetings. You've got a really important presentation coming up. 4 times 10K is a lot on the physical body. So your body is telling you right now you need rest, because you'll be in a better position next week. You could maybe do 12K, maybe not 4 times a week, but you've got to listen to your body and give it what it needs, because you need extra replenishment. Because what happens is high performers quantify how much electrolytes they need post-training, but they don't actually quantify how much nutrient replenishment they need after back-to-back board meetings, because that physiological response that has on the body depletes these critical nutrients. Because for our body to facilitate that stress response, that adrenaline, that cortisol, it depletes critical nutrients that are needed for those mitochondria I spoke about, for you to even produce ATP. And then the brain needs so much ATP, which is our energy, and can be linked to chronic migraines then when there's a disruption and an activation in neuroinflammatory pathways because of the chronic stress. So it's all interlinked. Our body communicates, and we've got to listen to it and give it what it needs. So a lot of what I'm doing with my high performers is testing is critical. We've got to look at the data. We've got to look at, are these neuroinflammatory pathways activated? How is the stress hormones? How is testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone, which are really critical as well? And then look at optimizing that on an individual basis, because there's been many times I've had high performers come to see me and I'm like, yes, it's their cortisol. It's their cortisol, it's their DHEA that's off rhythm. But actually I look, and with a male, it's testosterone is on the floor, and we're looking at primary hypogonadism. I'm seeing that in younger males now, which massively impacts dopamine. So men get that apathy, that lack of motivation. They're not getting that reward from dopamine. So they're sourcing it from things like, gambling, alcohol, online pornography. These addictions are really, really rampant. Then when women I look, it's like, oh, actually her progesterone and her estrogen is on the floor. And we know estrogen has a really important place in the brain. It's not just sex hormones. So yes, I think those areas are all very important.
I never thought about fueling for cognitive load, like for big, presentations, or if you were in kind of back-to-back board meetings. I've never really thought about fueling for that beyond kind of lunch, dinner and snacks. Like I would, of course, before going into kind of any sort of race training, like especially living in Singapore where the climate is extremely harsh, very, very hot, but making sure that I'm preloading with the salts, I've got my fueling throughout, and then making sure that I've got everything in for recovery. But I've never once thought about the cognitive work that I'm doing requiring the same sort of fueling.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, before I do any sort of presentation, I've got vitamin C in my water. This morning now, before I came here, because I have such a busy week this week, I had, like, each morning I've planned out my smoothie recipes where I pack it with vitamin C, magnesium, B vitamins, just to give that extra boost to compensate for the exertion, the cognitive overload that I'm going to need for this week. So yeah, it's not just about training. Our brain really takes up so much energy. I remember when I was doing my research and my dissertation at one point, and my husband was training for an Ironman, of course. And he went out, did a training session, and I was doing part of my systematic review. And I was sitting there maybe for about 2 to 3 hours back to back. And I was so exhausted afterwards. And he came in and he was quite exhausted. But although I was sitting, my brain was consuming so much energy. I was working a muscle. Like, your brain is like a very important muscle. But he was working his physical body, and we were both equally as exhausted. But we don't compensate because there's not that physical exertion. We can't see how much energy our brain is really using. So you've got to factor that in. We both needed to replenish the same amount. I needed my electrolytes, I need my vitamin C, so did he. I needed to protect my gut microbiome because the impact that the stress and the cortisol and the adrenaline had on my gut, my nervous system, similar to him. So you've got to factor that in when you've got a busy week, you've got presentations, you're preparing for something.
Shawn, what's the amount of energy that the brain uses? Do we know?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, so we know it uses, say, 20% of your oxygen consumption. So it uses a disproportionate amount, and most of that is actually just kind of maintenance. So it has to maintain a very strong gradient. So it's kind of like a dam, you can think of it, that it has to use to power all these different signals that our brain uses and whatnot. The thing about energy usage in the brain, though, is it's just like Jessica said, is it does get depleted, but your brain will actually start sacrificing more expensive cognitive tasking to maintain function. If you think evolutionarily speaking, the brain would never just hit the gas pedal and tell us, "Oh, can't do anything anymore," right? Like you never want that to happen. And so when it starts to run out of these resources, it'll start to get rid of or use easier, more efficient cognitive pathways. And this is what we see with decision fatigue. So basically the complex processing that can happen in your prefrontal cortex or other places of your brain, if it becomes exasperated, if too much, whether it's energy usage or what have you, it'll actually default to more efficient networks, because not all networks are the same. Just like roadways in a city, right? So complex thinking is like using your little neighborhood roads. But if it's too much energy is lost, or it's you become overwhelmed with that decision making, it'll default to higher throughput networks, your highways. That's your heuristics. That's when you default to those choices that you mentioned, like doom scrolling or comfort food or those other things, because it doesn't require cognitive processing. So yeah, the interesting thing about your brain is you have to watch for these symptoms. They're not obvious like muscle failure, but they do happen. And your brain will just try to find the easiest path, which is the most energy efficient path for processing. And that's what got me so excited about decision fatigue at large, I would say, is because it's physiological. Again, I go back to this, it's just we're starting to understand that the mechanisms behind this energy usage. And Jessica knows this very well, is not just your brain though. Physical health plays a massive role. So we've talked about stress, lack of sleep, inflammation, all of these different things changes that set point. And so it's not, the brain's never in isolation, and you don't suffer from decision fatigue in isolation. It very much depends on how healthy your body is. Exactly.
That's a really, really good point. And this is what I see a lot with my ME/CFS clients. So chronic fatigue syndrome, is our body only produces a certain amount of energy in a day. If we're dealing with inflammation, let's say, which is very, like, chronic inflammation is quite common, unfortunately, our energy goes to the immune system to help deal with that inflammation because it's seen as a priority. So one of the top symptoms in ME/CFS is brain fog, like lack of, memory, any sort of cognitive thinking, anything to do with a lot of neurological symptoms within ME/CFS, because our brain isn't getting that appropriate energy And what's happening is exactly what Shawn is saying. It's using different kind of pathways. And yeah, I see it quite a lot.
I mean, that's the reason why inflammation is like the core theory now for degenerative conditions. So like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, all these conditions where your brain cells start to die, which they shouldn't, right? Like the ones we have are basically the ones we have for life once you hit adulthood. So yeah, inflammation is key. It's a symptom, so something else is causing the inflammation, obviously, but it has a massive impact on your cognitive function daily, but also your brain health at large. And I mean, our brain wasn't designed for modern society, right? Like in evolution, like people weren't sitting by their campfires just thinking for so long. And cortisol is actually a fantastic adaptive response, right? Like it's there for a reason. You know, a tiger jumps out at you and you get a burst of stress hormone and your brain changes, you think harder. It's just the chronic stress, right?
Exactly.
It's the fact that we're living in a stressful environment, just riding on the tube to work. It's the same system being activated as when the tiger jumped out at us, right? And it's just all the time that it's just on. And that, I mean, you're stressing an organ in a way that it should never, or was never designed to handle. So that's why I see all these different fatigue, all these diseases, all these different issues pop up.
And often when we're talking about cognitive overload, we are talking about decision fatigue. You know, it's like the average person's making 35,000 decisions a day, and the brain just can't handle it, right? We've just not evolved to that point where we can do as much as we're trying to do with our brains.
Yeah, that's what fascinated me from this podcast too, is when we talk about people and we dig into it, it tends to be the number of decisions that they're overloaded with. Like your mom, what's for dinner question, right? Mm-hmm. It's the fact that you've just made so many decisions and your brain is like, as you described, Jessica, like I'm done, right? Mm-hmm. I'm going to default to whatever is easiest, but it affects our professional life. It can happen within hours in the morning. It's not just after work. But I think one thing that I really appreciate what you're doing is in neuroscience, we tend to look too much at the brain in isolation. Whereas, like your gut has a major impact. Your overall physical health has a major impact. It's not just the brain, it's the landscape that it lives in, the environment that your brain lives in. So
I would love to actually really get into the gut-brain connection.
How long have we got?
Yeah. Because just I honestly have had I had a couple of bouts of really truly horrific, hospitalized for food poisoning twice.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In my early 20s, and never had it back then. It was the antibiotics that just completely stripped everything out, and we never had any sort of education on building it back up again. And so for most of my 20s and early 30s, really, really, really struggled with my gut. And you know, brain fog and everything else that kind of comes off the back of it. But I don't know where to start. You help me. Where do we start?
Okay, first of all, I'm sorry you went through that.
Yeah.
And sad to say, your gut won't be the same as it was before the food poisoning. Food poisoning is one of the highest risks for a small intestine bacteria overgrowth. Okay, so it's just about keeping your gut managed from there out. Now, a small intestine bacteria overgrowth means that there's an imbalance of the bacteria in your microbiome in the small intestine. The majority of your bacteria should be in the colon, okay, which is the large intestine. Now, what that can do is, with that dysregulation of the bacteria, we call it a dysbiosis, okay, which is an imbalance of bacteria. That dysbiosis can be quite inflammatory. So if we imagine our small intestine like a very long tube, inside that tube, we've got a protective layer, the gut lining. They're like little hairs called microvilli, okay? So much happens at that surface. Now, let's say we've got a dysbiosis, a bacterial imbalance that dysregulates the lining of that intestine, those little hairs, and it can make it quite permeable. So they should be really tight junctions. They can become quite permeable when quite loose, okay? What can happen is proteins, toxins, other products can seep into the bloodstream. You then got this circulation of things like LPS, lipopolysaccharides. And what that can do is that it circulates puts a lot of pressure on other vital organs like your liver, your kidneys, but your brain most importantly. Now, we call the gut the second brain for a reason. It communicates via the nervous system, the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve runs from the back, the brain down the back of, most importantly, our digestive organs, but also reproductive organs and so on. Now, when the dysbiosis happens, a bacterial imbalance, which is actually quite common because we are in a fibre epidemic.
Yeah.
Nobody is eating. I'm very surprised when I have a patient come to me and they're eating enough fibre. Very surprised. We are not consuming enough fibre to help those beneficial bacteria thrive. So we're relying on quick, like probiotics, let's say, which is important after an antibiotic, but not so great to kind of manage a dysbiosis without fully understanding the root cause. So for you, the parasites is quite a significant, or the food poisoning was, that you had for your gut barrier, your gut lining. So you need to make sure you're constantly consuming the appropriate amount of fibre, managing stress response, unfortunately, because cortisol deteriorates muscle, and the gut lining is really, that's a muscle. And so you can get increase of these toxins, but inflammatory cytokines that circulate around the body. I commonly see this linked then to inflammation of the thyroid, so Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism. So then that really amplifies the fatigue, the difficulty making decisions, then impacts menstrual cycle. Then you've got that to deal with. So it can go on quite a downstream effect. Yeah. But the gut is so important here to kind of manage that, because we have more of bacterial cells in our body than we do human cells. Trillions. So we've got to keep these in harmony, because that even impacts how we absorb nutrients, that inflammatory response, our blood sugar regulation. So understanding the root cause of the dysregulation of your gut is imperative to start with.
Yeah.
And then managing that and getting, taking quite a personalized approach to help you optimize your gut. So for example, you're training for a marathon. So important to manage your gut health.
Yeah. I was just touching on that kind of bit with the marathon. Why and how? Because
of the increase in the stress hormones.
Yeah.
Okay, it is quite a physical stress on your body to go through that. Now, it's an incredible achievement. I'm not devaluing that at all. But you've got to, you've said your gut is a weak area for you.
Yeah. So
you've got to really manage your gut lining. So things like L-glutamine, but making sure you take it with B6 and magnesium, because L-glutamine can increase the excitatory glutaminergic pathway, which can actually make you more prone to anxiety, spontaneous anxiety, if you don't have appropriate B6 and magnesium there, which often high performers are really deficient in magnesium and B6.
Yeah.
Magnesium should be more spoken about than vitamin D, in my opinion. We are so depleted and deficient in magnesium. Women, we need about 330, men about 400 milligrams a day. We're not getting it from our foods.
Yeah.
I read a really interesting paper where we've lost up to 40% of magnesium from our soil in comparison to 100 years ago. So it's true when they say the apple you eat today is not the same as the apple your grandparents ate. So we need to make sure, even me being trained in the industry, I struggle to keep on top of my magnesium in my foods every day.
Yeah.
You have to eat a lot to meet it. So L-glutamine, but make sure B6 and magnesium is sufficient in your foods.
Do you have to take them together?
Yes. Well, not in the same day. You can take magnesium in the evening if you want a glycinate form to help optimize sleep. I would suggest a combination for your training. So magnesium is magnesium, but there are different forms. So glycinate is quite good for calming the nervous system, optimizing sleep. Malate is quite good for energy, works in that mitochondrial pathway in our citric acid cycle to help you convert to energy. You've got different threonate that helps cross the blood-brain barrier. You've got different forms. So I would suggest a combination at least between the malate, glycinate, which you can get there's quite good brands at the moment.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm totally turning in this episode into like a personal consultation. So sorry to all of our listeners. I'm like, right, okay, let me go down to the list of my ailments. This is what Shawn has to deal with on a daily basis. I'm like, Shawn, what do you think of this supplement? He's like, don't take that. It's got this in it. He ruins all the good stuff for me.
I try.
Yeah.
But you're right. Unfortunately, there is a lot of unregulated supplements out there that has unnecessary ingredients in it. And there's some supplement brands that their marketing is fantastic. Everything looks great. And I'm so excited to look at the ingredient list, and you're just let down.
Yeah.
You know, but you can really appreciate the brands that did their due diligence and didn't just look at the single impact that, let's say, nutrient has in the research. They're taking a clinical approach to it. You know, I often get a lot of brands ask me to, you know, be a kind of clinical advisor to like look at it, how it translates into the client, because, you know, you've got a lot of women's health supplements being pushed at the moment. And unfortunately, they don't have the clinical knowledge. They have fantastic evidence to say that this nutrient does X, Y, and Z. But there's many times I say I would not give that to my female client, because the journey they go on to the point of when they're researching to take that nutrient, they've already exhausted their resources. They could potentially be on an SSRI, an antidepressant. You know, there's many nutrients in that will contraindicate with that medication. So you've got to really have that clinical view, as well as not just the impact that nutrient has on a particular mechanism. So yeah, supplements are a difficult one, and they are quite complex, and unfortunately people are taking them just hoping for the best. Some of these, yeah. Anyway, we could do a whole podcast on that.
I know. And I would just come back actually to gut health. So, you know, Shawn, if my gut is in better health, is that going to be able to help me make better decisions? Is that going to impact decision fatigue? Am I going to be able to perform for longer periods of time, be more focused?
It's still in its infancy, to be honest. That whole field of study is relatively new to neuroscience. It's only recently that we realize that gut is such a key determinant of overall health, and especially into your cognition. So will your gut health affect decision fatigue? Of course it would, because it's affecting the foundational biology and how healthy you are. Specific mechanism to decision fatigue, I'm not familiar with any yet, so like a direct correlation between or causation. But certainly if you're unhealthy, be it your gut or other physical aspects of your body, it'll definitely reduce your resilience. To stress is, of course, a big one, but as well as decision fatigue. And resilience is a big thing. So decision fatigue, as we know, is the deteriorating quality of our decisions over long sessions of decision making. But what's interesting about it is that resilience towards that decline is affected by a variety of factors. So even nutrients or general nutrition, health, physical health. So like how well your body is in general. I would definitely assume that gut biome is included in that. But even like things like mindfulness practices, we know can affect your resilience to decision fatigue. So it's not just one answer, but simple answer to your question, would gut biome have an impact on decision fatigue or cognitive resilience at large? I don't think anybody would say no to that question. It absolutely does.
When my clients who have got, let's say, IBS, SIBO is the small intestine bacteria overgrowth, when their gut flares, their brain shuts down. They just cannot. The brain fog is so overwhelming. They need to lay down. They really struggle to impact. Now, as Shawn said, like, it's really in its infancy, the research, but that communication via the vagus nerve, we know that the gut microbiome specific, bacteria can create that inflammatory response in the central nervous system, which can really impact our brain functioning. So sometimes it can be quite immediate when someone's gut flares up, and how their brain can just, it almost, they say it's like a complete cloud that just comes over.
And it goes back to what I mentioned previously too, like society's outpaced evolution, right? So human existence, say we're 98% on the savanna plain, right? Like that's how our body was designed around. And now look at our diet, right? Like if we just look at our diet today, it's going to be completely different from what we were eating or what our body was originally designed for. So when you have this mismatch, this evolutionary mismatch, this is where you see things go wrong. And that's what we're trying to figure out. And supplements are great. Like you said, they can be very, very good. But my opinion ultimately is they're called supplements for a reason, right? To supplement a good diet.
Exactly.
But that good diet is actually really hard to do. It's not something that's like you read stuff and people tell you what a good diet is, but functionally it's very hard to do. I imagine for your clients too, like it's easy to say, but day in and day out, it's difficult to eat that well, that high quality all the time. And then add to it stress, pollution, right? Even just in London here, definitely there's going to be pollution on the street. In Singapore, which is one of the cleanest cities in the world, standing at a bus stop for something like 10 minutes and you see iron oxide in the brain, which is like a pro-inflammatory, a pro-oxidative molecule, right? So even in clean cities, it's an issue. So I mean, not to get super depressing at all. There's things that we can do. Certainly talking to Jessica.
It's important for people to know this so they can make informed decisions and they're not going into that self-blame cycle of it must be me. What am I doing wrong? Yeah. We have to understand our environment. And it comes back to the rhythms I said at the beginning. If we can stay in rhythm with what our body needs, and I suppose this is where the personalized approach comes into my clients. The majority of them, they're on a relatively healthy diet. They're taking supplements. You know, they're doing all the right things that they think they're doing. But then I do a complete valuation and an assessment. And I said, actually, you're not consuming the right, let's say, macronutrients and micronutrients for what you need based on what you're doing in your day-to-day. So it's really bringing it down to that personalized approach and how they can optimize their gut and understand all these other symptoms. Because, you know, for women, as you said, oxygen in the brain, iron deficiency is really important. That helps us with circulating oxygen around our brain. It's what those mitochondria need. Mitochondria need oxygen, glucose, ketones. They're the initial fuel that the mitochondria needs. And we are not getting these sufficient nutrients because we're getting the blood sugar dysregulation from the high stress. Our body's trying to cope with all these environmental toxins, the oxidative stress from that. So it's just about giving the information so people can make more informed decisions to have that personalized approach and not just that blanket one size fits all, like the 5 a day. Not even for children is the 5 a day appropriate these days. Like I'm trying to get my clients aiming for 8 to 9 portions a day. And that might come close to the fibre intake they should be eating, which we need about 28 to 30 grams of fibre per day. Yeah. So it can be very individual, but people are really trying their best and it's just about making it personalised to them.
There's also some of that is that the quality of the food that you're getting though as well. You know, you're saying apples not the same as what our grandparents ate.
Exactly.
You know, the apples can't be compared to apples, you know, anymore. And I think that's also quite hard. As you know, you're saying 8 to 9 pieces, but 8 to 9 pieces in Singapore where we don't grow our own food, every single piece of fruit and vegetable is imported. Tomatoes don't taste like tomatoes, versus you go and eat in Italy when all the food is grown locally. You know, tomatoes taste like tomatoes. Everything's amazing. You're going to be getting quite a different reaction to those, right?
I didn't realize in Singapore a lot of it is imported.
Tiny island, like we're like 50 miles across, something like that, and there's like almost 6 million people living on this tiny island.
Oh wow.
So nothing is grown there, bar like I think there's a couple of, you know, indoor farms, but they're tiny, so every single thing is flown in and imported.
No, and you hit a point too, is those micronutrients in the soils. Because usually we measure like the macros, but we don't. There's a big, and again, the science is in its infancy, I would say, is the importance of these micronutrients. Even for a different company I worked with, like when we have supplements for physicians, but actually we had to add selenium to our supplement just because there's soils in Southeast Asia that are deficient in selenium. And selenium's a building block, and a lot of these metals are like cofactors for different enzymes and things. So we had to add in selenium just to make sure people are up to a certain level, because the enzyme that we were interacting with needs selenium to even basically be there. And so, yeah, it's not recorded. There's no, you know, industry standard for it. It's just you actually test the food and there's no selenium in it. So yeah, the soil, it's on one hand, we're missing the micronutrients. On the other hand, we're getting a buildup of the bad things. So cadmium is like a big issue, right? Even lead, which now we test for, which is pretty good. So we're losing the good small metals, but we're gaining a lot of those bad ones. So you have to be very careful, even fortunately food.
I've spoke to someone a while ago, and it might have been on one of the podcasts, that there's going to be new technology coming out where you are going to be able to scan your food. So you're going to be able to, like, pick an apple up and test the apple and test the quality of an apple versus an apple, in terms of like that individual fruits nutrients. Like that's the technology, where the technology is going, and we will literally kind of carry these tools with us.
That's a good thing and a bad thing, unfortunately. Disordered eating and orthorexia, I'm seeing it's really a concern at the moment. I think that would be good for suppliers to have, but maybe not the individual.
Yeah.
Because that can really cause a lot of disordered eating. And just with a lot of the information that's been pushed out online, yes, a lot of it's coming from a good place, but can really be taken out of context.
Yeah.
And I'm having to debunk a lot in my consultations at the moment. And that's why I think it's important to come back to testing. Like I do a lot of functional testing and just showing them
on yourself,
actually,
not the food.
Yeah, on yourself, and showing actually what a good place you're in as well. Because a lot of people can come quite alarmed, quite scared, quite, cutting out a lot of really important food groups and just trying a lot of these fad diets and concerned about all the toxic overload. And yes, it is a concern, but it deters them from eating anything at all. And that's also a concern. You're not getting enough protein and fat. There's no supplement you can supplement your way out of that, because you're not getting protein and fat. You're not making hormones. You're not making these steroid hormones like cortisol, cortisone, what we're talking about. So there's a lot of good and really exciting stuff and companies producing things, but I think they've just got to understand how that translates to the individual as well.
Yeah, I don't think the technology is quite there. I mean, I know a few companies who have tried to even do like personalized supplements. So it's like a Keurig, like a coffee machine, and it'll test you and then it'll give you a curated supplement. Really cool idea. And maybe one day we will get there, but we're not close. We're so far away from like a comprehensive test. So you have to go see somebody.
Oh, so it pricks your blood and then it automatically makes
actually, right? Like it was like I don't know what it was, but like it's such a neat idea. Like I love it. And maybe one day we will, but we're a long ways away from that real personalized testing to actually get a rigorous understanding of what you're potentially missing or what you're doing good at. Or
I'm like,
there's a lot of promises out there though for that.
Yeah, I will be the first person in line to have a little implant in somewhere that is reading my blood at all times and it's telling me like, okay,
Oh, those are coming.
Am I high on this, low on this? Do I need to drink more? Like, give me the data, give me the information, tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Take my money.
I do
basically.
like that. We have done a few big projects where like glucose monitoring is now more readily available. So actually, like little gadgets that are not as invasive as they used to be. And recent publication came out looking at hormone tracking. Not commercialized yet, but they're getting to a place that you can just put again in a little pin. You can actually see the fluctuations throughout the course of the day, see how your diet, your exercise may impact it. So knowledge is a good thing. You just need to make sure it's high quality, and then you need to be able to interpret it properly. That's you need to go talk to Jessica.
I was about to say that's right? What you guys are here for.
Yeah, no, Jessica, more the like I love this functional approach because medicine or science in general are always so isolated, right? Which that's not how the body works. So you need to talk to someone to make sure that you're using that information appropriately in the right way. So information and knowledge is always great. It's just you have to make sure the person looking at it understands what they're looking at.
Yeah, because with a lot of my execs, my high performers, when we initially start, we do a full health assessment and I get them doing blood, urine, saliva and stool. So I'm doing a full kind of head to toe in understanding how their gut is functioning, how they're digesting, absorbing, what inflammatory markers are there, nutrients, how they're responding to their environment. Like, are they nutrient sufficient? Their oxidative stress pathways, their heavy metals, toxic load, like literally I do a lot of epigenetics. So epigenetics is basically you're born with genes 50% from your mother, 50% from your father. Epigenetics is like the switch that switches on and off those genes, and it's very easily manipulated by our environment, stress, nutrition. So I do a lot of epigenetic testing to actually see where they're at, and especially things like methylation, which is a really important pathway. So it's about understanding that individual, their epigenetic response, how their gut is digesting and absorbing, how they're responding to their environment, actually showing them how good they're doing, I think is really important, and then where we're going to work on and how to optimize that then based on their performance, what they want to achieve, what they're training for, their exertion, all of that is so important, because so often it sometimes is the opposite of what they're doing. I said, actually, we need to be focusing more on this, but they're doing the other, like, let's say, trying to train for the marathon, doing all the healthy stuff physically, but it's on the flip side. It's like, actually, this is the physical load, the psychological stress, or the physiological stress that we need to optimize, because that can help them with the decision fatigue, the cognitive overload when we work on those pathways.
You literally just answered my next question, which was going to be, you know, how are you empowering your high performers to make, you know, conscious and better decisions? And to me, that just seems like, you know, making sure everything's rooted in data, personalized data, you know, aligning that with the goals, and then coming up with kind of that personalized approach for achieving that.
Mm-hmm.
With a lot of my high performers, it's giving them the data.
Yeah.
It's showing them, this is what your body is telling me, and this is what we need to support. Because sometimes, you know, you'll hear a lot, I'm too busy, I don't have time to prioritize my health. They're very focused, like I said, on output, and they sometimes see as, you know, focusing on their health sometimes as a little bit of a setback, or their brain naturally goes to, why can't I no longer think my way out of this task? Why is it taking me longer to recall my memory on this particular area? Because they got to where they were built on these pathways being so strong and resilience. And then when they start to not be as sharp, they instantly, kind of what we said earlier, go on that kind of self-blame, and then they try to push themselves even harder in that. And it's all output, output, output. But when you can show them the data, be like, look, there's this physiological stressors that are being activated, which impacts what you're noticing from a cognitive perspective. We need to work on this. It's not a setback. It's actually going to bring you forward. You won't be able to compare yourself to the previous version of you that got yourself here, because you might actually even excel even more. So and then they learn so much about their body that they don't need me anymore. They know how to prepare for long distance travel. They know what their body needs for X, Y. I kind of prepare them to have this kind of toolbox. So this is what's going to be in your toolbox for the foreseeable. You take this out and this out for this situation, and they know. So they just, again, come back to rhythm. They're in rhythm with their body. They're in rhythm with the different cycles, the different pathways. They're so in tune, because they tend to lose that intuition, that connection with their body. Really bring it back to mind, body, soul, and the mindfulness techniques you were mentioning earlier. Just grounding again, coming back, getting that flow that you mentioned. They just feel like they can so easily dip back into flow state, and they're much more ahead. They find they don't need as much time, early hours. So yes.
And it's ultimately all going to support cognitive overload and decision fatigue. We're out of time, but thank you so much, Jessica. It's been amazing to talk to you today. I'm going to link to all of your profiles below, because I know that there are so many people that will be listening to this that I think, okay, I need a Jessica and to help me start to look at all of this. You know, myself included. There have been just some incredible insights in here, and I'm so grateful for you talking to us today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jessica. I think it's really important for people to recognize that there's folks out there like you, because I think it's pretty daunting. It can be overwhelming too, because there's so much information. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
And to everyone listening, as always, please ask questions. We'll get Jessica to answer them. Like, share, comment. Please send this to a friend or family member that you think would find this interesting. And we'll be back next week. And in the meantime, make every decision count. Thanks. Bye.